Hello, ladies and gentlemen. We are Adventuresome Reviews, and I, being a man of profligate generosity,
Doubtful. Continue.
untamed munificence, have decided, to the grandeur and jubilation of all probably, that I'm going to be
Also
lazy
questionable.
today, and let my brother do all the work.
I didn't do any research to do any sorts of work, so I don't think that's going to turn out very well.
Train wrecks are very entertaining.
I don't even know the book's name. I forgot it entirely. I also forgot the contents of the book. I also forgot what we're doing here.
Here I was doing a fancy self-dig, and then you just took it and drove yourself into the ground.
With good cause, because I really don't know the author's name.
Julia Michalisi.
Alrighty, I should now assume the lion's share of the work.
I will just sit here and judge you very silently and with many elegant hand gestures.
You do that.
I will. It gives me pleasure.
Today we are reviewing a book by the name of The Wizard's Ward by Julia Michalisi.
A book that was submitted to us. And if this keeps up, our graveyard is going to get rather full.
Which is a joke y'all will only understand if you watch the last video.
You should
And we'll
do
keep
that.
it that way.
I'm going to turn it into a running gag so they always have reasons to go back and watch our videos. Like, I might sprinkle in hidden secrets about rewards here and there so they go and they watch our entire library for some hidden treasure that doesn't exist.
I'm down.
Of course you're down.
I like running people on circles. Anyways, this book deals with fantasy nonsense of wizards and wards and rebel kingdoms is all great, and modern fantasy books do.
It's a young adult romance fantasy pitched to us as a mix. Oh, I forget the first, but it was a mix of Graceling and something else. I just read it and it's already left my mind. I was too busy trying to remember the author's name, which is just tragic.
You're just a bouquet of forget-me-nots, aren't you?
Yes. One in particular.
Yes.
The rest were kind of forgotten.
It, of course, deals with the ward, who is a mysterious baby thrust onto the wizard by a centaur.
Yeah, and then magically bound to
It was actually a really cool, or it was one of the best scenes of the book, particularly because it actually has a relatively decent payoff near the end.
Mm-hmm.
But the wizard is off in a Fey village buying recipes, and on his way home he gets this random centaur storms through the forest, grabs him up, shakes him around, and basically goes, "Here's a baby." The wizard's like, "No, I don't want part of this. It seems a little bit icky." Too late. Hits him with a curse and then just runs off without explaining jack diddly. It was like, okay, that centaur is kind of baller.
Yeah, and the story follows that our main protagonist, whose name is... You just read this book and I've forgotten. We are really bad at this / names in general. Because again, I just reread the synopsis like 5 minutes ago.
The only thing I can remember, or it's not even remember, it's like I keep thinking Balthazar is the wizard's name, but
No.
That's not. It was a very unwizardly name, though. Regardless, the main character is, of course, this mysterious child who gets thrust upon the wizard by that centaur.
Yeah, and she's the main character for the story, and she's raised up in a weird space in the palace of the kingdom. And
Because she's not noble, but she's not a servant either, so she kind of just hangs out in the wizard's tower and gets taught magic by the wizard. And the wizard is, of course, her surrogate father, and he actually does this really well.
yes, and the event that incites the actual narrative, the true kicking off point of the narrative, which is 4 or 5 chapters in, is that the wizard goes missing.
Which is, of course, fairly major events, because wizards don't just go missing without some pretty hefty thingamabobber doodles going on in the background.
Yes, and this completely throws
Our main character's life into chaos and carnage. Not quite, but
she gets immediately reduced to a scullery maid, and while being deeply worried about her surrogate father, and it's those events that progress the story forward.
And so, of course, she has to go off onto this heroic quest to find or save the wizard, which is, like the relationship between the wizard and the main character is thoroughly enjoyable.
Yes, it's well balanced, and it's one of the few relationships in the book, and we're getting to my first bit of criticism, that really lives up to everything you want and expect it to be. The other major relationship is between her and her, at least for this book, the primary romance counterpart, simply titled X, for reasons in the book that come out fairly late that we're not going to get into.
Her romance interests, the guy's name is X because his father didn't give him a name.
Yes.
And there's familial reasons behind that.
And so X is left me in something of a mixed bag. On one hand, he had a really interesting character dynamic of a person who goes through traumatic experiences and so develops an over-reliance on the childhood friend / romantic counterpart. But that was barely explored in the narrative. And it left an underwhelming impression because the plot points were rushed. It's not a long book,
right,
but it's still like the plot points of that were rushed, and the fallout was almost instantaneous. Not necessarily in the course of the book, but from her perspective, per se, the main character's perspective. And it's just there was so little interplay with her, and
she only really ever interacts or she meets various characters throughout the book, but she only has actual interaction scenes with like 3 of them, right? The boyfriend, the father, and then uppity noble girl who bullies her.
yes.
And whenever the author takes the time to actually give her characters a moment to interact with one another, these are generally powerful scenes.
Yes.
Right? Because, so let's take the stuck-up noble lady who bullies her main character. There's a ball coming up, and so our main character has this dress that she thinks is really pretty, and it's simple, and she likes how it looks, but kind of via an off-head interaction she has with this snobby noble lady, she starts hating on this dress, thinking it's not enough, thinking it's a peasant Sunday best, when kind of she needs all the glitz and glam.
Yes.
And that was a great scene to illustrate both how like young the main character is, because she's only 15, and this is her first ball, so it is at once kind of small but also major in her life, while at the same time illustrating the kind of unpleasantness of the snobby character. And then you have other scenes where she interacts with the boyfriend, and it's like, you get flashbacks, right, of their childhood, and it's like, this does an adequate job of building up this tight relationship, right, where you actively want to see them together because they kind of helped each other out. They were basically each other's only friends, right? And he had this massive amount of pressure from his father to succeed and be competent and to be all that was expected of him. And he was kind of scared of this and buckling under the pressure until he met her. And because she's a bit of a prodigy, she helped him bear up.
She's a little bit too much of a prodigy in some scenes without explanation.
Yeah. But she helped him survive the younger years and turn out as a moderately okay individual, despite being noble and having an oppressive father and just all that comes with that. And this is one of the things I actually really liked about the book, is he is then sent away to military camp by his father.
Not just military camp. We're not talking training. We're talking more of brutal weed out the weak and make monsters of them.
Right, the best of the best, the most brutal, basically stamp out emotion type thing. And throughout this training, he only survives primarily because of his intense
devotion to her.
Right.
And all this sets up a really interesting character dynamic of, because he becomes overly dependent upon her even when he returns.
The good childhood friendship becomes toxic dependency, and kind of where he thinks they are fated to be together.
Yes, but you also have interplays of like real attachment and affection with the lingering trauma of the events and the fact that they effectively turned him
into a sociopath. But at the same time, even as he's the sociopath, he wants to be better than his father. And it's like he doesn't act, he's struggling, he spends part of the book struggling with his dark side. And this lends to a really engaging narrative where you want to see her pull him from the darkness.
And so take all that we just talked about, how complicated of a character this was set up to be. And the author speed ran that entire narrative. And I don't want to spoil the ending, like how it progresses, but not only just speed ran it, skimmed the surface. It did not delve into the depths of the character she created.
Because that is like an absolutely fantastic network of character interaction on both sides. And it's like there's affection on both sides. It's like they're both deeply attached to one another.
Yes, but part of it is that on both sides, but because the interactions element is on both sides, because your main character does not really interact with this narrative. She doesn't even realize it exists.
We are only exposed to it because we look inside the boyfriend's head, right? They don't discuss the events at all. She doesn't even ask about it. Basically, he comes home.
They discuss it a little bit, but
it's basically a single line of, I don't want to be my father. That's the entirety of the interaction that we get at all. Or then it's like he pushes a couple boundaries because of his trauma. That's it.
Yeah.
But you want him to push the boundaries, but you also want to have the discussion and have them actually interact in more ways. Because after he comes home, it's basically they meet, they share doe eyes at each other, and then he asks her to elope, and she goes with him, and then she says, but I need to go find my father. He says, okay, I'll go help you, and they elope to go find her father. Right? Which is, once again, a fantastic Kickstarter for the relationship, because they're out there in the world alone. They're the only two people who can rely on each other. He is broken and psychotic, not psychotic, but sociopathic. She is incredibly unworldwise, young and unworldwise. It's like, that is just a fantastic narrative.
Yes.
And once again, the author just speeds runs it. And this is kind of something that continues throughout the book, of the author doesn't really, because they eventually fall into a group of rebels. There's like 5 rebels here. You don't get a single scene where she actually interacts with the rebels, apart from maybe one.
Yeah.
And it kind of leaves me remembering just 2 incredibly brief moments of a relationship that is continuous, like her with the rebels, that continues throughout half the book. Right? And it's like, I have no idea who these characters are. They spend more time interacting with each other than with her.
Yeah.
And this is a consistent thing. She does not interact with any character apart from the boyfriend and the wizard. And the wizard is disappeared for 3/4 of the book.
Yes.
Which is a shame, because when the author does do character interactions, they're generally really strong scenes.
Something I liked about the book was the actual world building. I don't remember what exactly, but it's elves, humans, mermaids. No, centaurs wasn't the fourth one, but unless it was. Witches. And so you're set up with four major dominant races, which is the humans, elves, merfolk, and the witches. And the elves, which is the kingdom that she was raised in, recently conquered the human kingdom. And
ever since they've been conducting a war against the witches, a costly, stagnant war that the king is waging to try. Okay, so the king's father conquered the humans, died, and then his son ascended to the throne, and he started a war against the witches because he needed to live up to his father's legacy. And this is a bloody, long-running war that he's running out of funds to wage.
He's running out of disposable soldiers. He's running out of funds. He's running out of support. And there's dragons involved and items that can cancel out witchcraft and magic. And so it just creates a very vibrant narrative setting, especially since it's introduced very early on that your main character does not easily fall into any of these racial groups.
And what's more is that one thing that I kind of liked about the book is that the world is going on around the main character without her being directly involved. This war is fighting, and she's kind of she doesn't even talk about the war. You just hear it from X, or aka the boyfriend, and his discussions with the king, or the king's discussions with the surrogate father. She almost does not come into contact with the world at large, and it's actually I really like this because the world is taking place outside of the main character.
Yes.
This important and good writing.
Yes.
But of course, this elvish king is tyrannical and evil, and so hence the rebels.
Yeah. And there's secret organizations rolling about, and there's a prophecy, which...
Yeah, I'm kind of bored of prophecies, but they're necessary at sometimes.
Yeah.
Would it be a spoiler to tell them what the main character is? Because of course she has main character juice.
I would not, because it's a specific mystery maintained by the book.
Okay. That being said, there's a mystery around the main character. There's actually like two mysteries around the main character, and the book uses them fairly well on both accounts.
Yes.
So, props to the book.
Something I think the book did less well was the mystery of what happened to her surrogate father. He disappears, and that's largely the end of it. He disappears, and she grabs a clue and goes off and finds him, and finding him is the driving force of the narrative, and it's what compels her through various adventures and odds and ends, but there's no interaction with what actively happened with him until he shows back up again.
Right.
And that is the driving force of the narrative. For it to not have any interactions, often, or not often, but had the effect of making several stretches of the book feel a little bit, not necessarily purposeless, because they're always going towards that destination.
Okay, so the problem is not that they weren't progressing. The problem is that they were constantly getting thrown into offshoots. And it's not offshoots that kind of wrapped around and
or
eventually
intertwined with the main plot. They were having adventures in pursuit of the main plot, but the main plot had very little interaction in the narrative.
They kept getting side quests by characters and minor villains and minor heroes they interacted with.
Yeah. And it did take some momentum from the narrative for me.
Not necessarily, because the ones who... It's like, they meet a pirate at some point, and the pirate is, like, my favorite character in the book. Like, once again, the author does great on nuanced characters, actually.
Well, I disagree with X, but...
Well, X is a nuance. She doesn't execute it perfectly, but X is a nuanced character.
So not necessarily execution, but you mean developing.
Right. It's because the pirate is as strong. It's as a reader, you don't necessarily know where he aligns until like the very end of the book. It's like, is he an element of chaos? Is he just out for money? Is he actually? Because there's a rumor that he's part of the rebel armies, but he doesn't confirm it, and you don't know it. He constantly, it's like, this is kind of rude and verging on evil. Some of the things he does, and so he's just a really interesting character.
Yeah.
So at one point, he sends our main characters off to find him a dragon. It's like, okay, he's getting them. He wants to get them killed for no good reason. But he has a reason for this, and it eventually ties in to the main plot, and it's just,
yeah. I did enjoy the pirate. He was, like you said,
probably like the best handled character, because he forced interaction every scene he was in.
Yeah. The writing was largely decent. Not perfect by any stretch, but largely decent. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I really wanted to say.
I'm largely done. In general, I actually liked the book. It was kind of a nice, easy read. Some of the plots took place a little too quickly.
I may have found the main character a little bit more on the boring side.
I don't know, because it's like she had emotional reactions, and it's like well-founded and balanced emotional reactions, so she didn't fly off the handle ever, but she had emotion.
Okay, So, your main character is trained as a wizard.
Right.
She remembers none of her spells. She has a secret power that she can utilize that's incredibly potent and very open-ended. She can barely utilize it. And so it's just, there came a point in time where it was just, the fact that she couldn't do any magic despite training for 15 years, it was like, not appealing.
Yeah. Now that you mentioned it, I'm not overly bothered by her not being able to use any wizardly magic, because the author clearly stated that she didn't really pay attention in her classes. But she was an avid reader, and she's supposedly a decent sword fighter and all that and everything. However, it seems like, looking back over the book, the only time she asserted herself in the narrative was kind of as a Deus Ex Machina moment to save everyone with her special power in it. Not necessarily a BS way, but just pushing the universe to bend in just the way she needed for things to be saved. Elsewise, she kind of did nothing and just kind of sat on her hands.
I think that's kind of what it was. It takes a long time before she starts doing stuff on her own, despite having taught herself how to use the bow, learning sword play.
Because she makes a couple proactive decisions early on. It's like with the investigation into the disappearance of her surrogate father and the decision to go chasing after him. And just after that, she attaches herself to not more competent, but more proactive people who pull her through the narrative and frequently save her until the author wants to drop a mystery as to what her power is. And then the power comes into play, she saves the day, and continue in form.
Yeah, and it's not like I want her to do everything, because that's imbalanced character-wise. And even the main narrative is her going somewhere of her own volition. It's just the events that make up the steps of the journey are largely propelled by other characters.
And the traps she falls into are resolved largely by other characters.
Yeah.
That being said, I still like the character's personality. Maybe because once again, it's nuanced, right? From her attachment to the surrogate father, how she's kind of young and not super world-wise.
Yes, but that's it. Just is that her attachment to her surrogate father / boyfriend don't really manifest tangibly, because she doesn't interact with the boyfriend in any meaningful way.
Okay, so
her father's not present.
Okay,
and I have one other point to bring up, and her naivety is also not tangibly affecting the narrative, because she's constantly given characters to enshrine her from it, that guide her and help her along. so that she doesn't suffer any consequences or put into situations. And she never puts her trust in a character that betrays her or cheats her, or she never pays any consequences for naivety.
Yeah, I think I'm probably confusing personality with emotionness.
Oh no, she has a wide range of emotions.
Right, and which is what makes her character really strong, is because she emotes really well.
Mm-hmm.
I was confusing that with kind of actual personality traits, because she has a few. They're just not as loud as I might like.
I don't have a good grasp on who she was as a character.
Like the one characters we have like a thoroughly solid grasp of is X and the surrogate father.
The pirate as well. Like, he's still a little bit mysterious and up there, but he's supposed to be. And you really have a good grasp of his motivations and his role in the narrative. In a way you don't for her, besides, okay, she's the main character, prophesized savior. That's about all I have to say.
Yeah.
I talked way more. You should have.
No, I talked fair amounts today for once.
It wasn't about making you talk more. It was about making me talk less so I could sleep. And so we could save the listeners from listening to my horrific screeching tones. So they could listen to your dual set notes instead.
That's all right. Our editor edits your in post-production. You have the voice of an angel, my brother.
Real angels or romanticized versions?
Romanticized versions.
That makes more sense.
Fare thee well, our future friends.
Au revoir.